Now, so manipulation or handling the attributes. So let me start with a simple example. For instance, let's say we have a anchor link, right? So let's say I'm going to say it as, for instance, Google, right? And we are going to actually have href, right? So initially, for instance, we don't know what's a URL. So we are going to get it and assign, for instance. That's how we're going to do. So in this, let's understand how we can actually change it using jQuery. So I'm going to take script. So in this, let me write document ready. I'll take the function. So in this function, I'll start. So now we know that what we have to do, we have to change the one of the attribute of anchor. So let me take this anchor link's ID as, for instance, my ID, for instance, right? This is my ID. So let's take up now dollar hash ID, which is straightforward. It will get my anchor, and then I have a method called attribute attr. Now here I can actually access which attribute I want href attribute to be changed to what I want to change it to http www. Let's say google.com, for instance. This is the URL which I want to change. That's how we change. So for instance, let's say, let me call this in a button click. Instead of actually directly taking on a load, let's take in a button. So let's say, I'll say change URL, I'll just say, and I'll call it as ID as btn change, right? So when I click on this button, then only my attribute of anchor should change. So that's a catch here. So I'm going to take btn change hash, and I'll take, so when I want it, when it click happens, perfect. And then I'll take some function, and in this function I'll write the, right? So this is how we can actually do this. So now whenever I click on this button, then only my action will happen. End of the day, attr, this is an important attribute which we have, which we're going to learn now, right? So let me run this page. Right, so let's say here you have, so initially you can see when I go back here, there is nothing. It's href hash meaning stay the same page. See, when I click on this, it will be in the same page kind of, but dynamically what I want to do, I want to change, right? I want to change the type here, meaning when I click on the button, now it will change the attribute. And when I click on this, now what happens, it will add the attribute to this. Now see, when I mouse over, see in my status here, right, the status bar, you can see that it is giving the new URL which got assigned. Now when I click on it, now you can see it will redirect my request to Google.com. That's how the attribute is changed. Similarly, we can actually do this stuff for, let's say, let me take one more example of, for instance, image, which we normally do, right, regularly. For instance, for image, we have source. For instance, I don't know the source of image when I'm actually, right, taking it out, right? So for instance, I have an ID for image. Let's make it my img, and then let me take some input button to change image. Let's say image set something, and let's take ID as btn set something. Now, which means here what I want to do, I want to set the source of this image, right? So let's take this up, right? I've actually taken some of the images here. Let's say you can see here, off and on we have. So we want to set one of the image to this, for instance. Yep, we can do that. I'll take this button set, Let's go and say dollar. We have hash button set dot click, right? Whenever click event happens, right, I want to handle something. What to handle? Dollar. I'm going to take my image, which is the ID of image, hash ing dot attribute. So which attribute I want to change? Its source attribute to what? For instance, on dot png. This is what I want to change the image. That's how we handle the attribute. So now when I run this page, so now you'll see, initially you can see that there is nothing in here, right? So you can, so for instance, by default, if you want to keep, let's say I'm going to keep off.png, for instance. And when I refresh this, let's say these are off. When I click on this image set, you can see it will change to on, for instance, right? So that's how we set the attribute of image. Now similarly, we can set some properties as a such, right, of the elements. So for instance, let's take a simple use case that I have some checkboxes. Let me just, now this is something which we normally do in real time, most of the times to handle based on one handle multiple. Let's say value will give something called all, and let's say I'm going to give ID as chk all. Let's call it as all is my checkbox. Now similarly, I have multiple checkboxes, for instance, right? So let's say this 1, 2, and 3. So for instance, this is check 1, check 2, chk, right, where value is 1, 2, and 3, for instance. So these are my checkboxes. So when I run this, when we look at a browser, let's say here we have. So what I want to do, whatever action I perform here to all, but by default we want to set the same action to the remaining strings. That's what we want to do. So let's see how we can actually achieve that. Now here, for instance, I want to take the action on check all, right? So let's do handle that in check all. Dollar hash check all dot what action? It's a change action, right? Change event we want to handle. Now what to do here? Now here, when I'm actually handling it, what I want to do, I want to make sure all the elements which are maybe next to, for instance, I want to do. So for instance, let's handle it. So I'll take hash check all dot, I'll take, we have learned something called next all, right? Next all meaning it will actually give us all the elements next to this. So what we have all checkboxes, for instance. So I'll take dot, we have something called property, prop, right? So I'm taking, okay, what to do here? So here I'm setting property of checked. So we know that we have a property for a checkbox called checked, right? So we have seen some time back checked. The same property, I'm going to take it here, checked, and I want to set. Now when I say I want to set, right, I want to set it dynamically, not like I'll just say true or checked or something. So I want to set based on the state of check all itself, right? Yeah, I can get it. Let's say check all dot, either you can say is, right? We know is, right? Is something called checked. When I say this, which means it will give me whether it is true or false, right? Is checked. Well, if it is true, then property of checked will be true. If it is false, then property of this will be false, and it will set to all the checked. Let's see this. When I run this, when I click on this, right, it is not assigning. Why it is not assigning? Let's see. So checkbox check all. Let me just take some alert here. Debug. Let's debug this and check what is happening here. Let's run it. So change it. It is giving me false. Dollar check all. is checked, or else we can take, you should give me true. Let's get the object, 0th instance object dot, I have something called checked. Let's do this one, because using get, right, I'm getting in my check call, when I say get of 0, which means I'm getting the first element itself is the same. Now this will give me the DOM object. In DOM object I have checked. Let's see this. Click on it. Oh, it is true, you can see, and now it is working. Uncheck, false, perfect. So let me remove this and run it. So when I check it, you'll see, uncheck it, check it, and this is how we can actually handle. So for instance, if you have other types too, so let's say here I have a radio, for instance, right? So what happens? I mean, this radio, because I'm doing next all, right? Now definitely even radio will be included, right? So when I check it, you'll see even radio is getting checked and unchecked, right? So for instance, here if you want to change only for checkbox, you don't want to change, then you can always go for filters, right? We have something called filter. You have already understood. So either you can directly say filter here, right? Filter, what to filter here? For instance, I want all input checkbox, right? So I can run this. So when I click on it, now you can see only checkboxes will be checkboxes will act on this. That's it. So no other control will. So it depends. If you remove this filter, it will apply for all, and if you place it, it will actually work on the same filter as such. So this is how we normally change the properties and attributes. So we were talking about changing the properties and attributes, right? Similarly, we can remove some attributes, for instance. So let me give you a small example here. Removing attribute, meaning when we are removing, meaning we are almost like we're changing some attribute here. But let me show you how a remove attribute works. So let me comment all this. So for instance, let me take a simple checkbox and let's say value, here I'm saying uh, change state. So what I'm going to do here is, based on this checkbox, check and uncheck, I want to enable and disable my text box, for instance, right? So let's say this is id is equal to txt state, I'm saying, and here I'll take id as for instance chk state, I'll take. So based on the checkbox, right, check and uncheck, I want to disable and again enable this text box, right? We know that if you want to disable, we know that we have a we know that we have an attribute called disabled, but initially let's say I don't want to do any disabling or anything, right? So let's handle out this one. So hash check state dot change, right? So when I say change, now what I have to handle, I want to handle, right, whether to disable or not. So how to get the state? Again, I want to get the state from here, right? So which is, if I'll check this meaning the same checkbox, it will take the same context here, dot, I'll say get of 0. I'm getting my DOM element and say checked. Fine. If it is checked, then what to do? Then I want to, let's say, disable this check state. Then I'll say dot, I have something called attr, right, attribute. So here in this example we're going to do both, right, adding attribute and remove. That's what we have learned. So I'll say disabled attribute, right? So what is the value will be disabled attribute. I'm populating with disabled, then my text box will get disabled. Else what to do? Now the same text, I want to remove attribute. So which attribute I want to remove? Disabled. If I remove this disabled, Now my text box is no more a disabled state, right? It will get it will get re-enabled again. So when I run this program, you will see when I click on it, see it will be disabled and user cannot do anything. When I uncheck it, it will get enabled. So I can write something here. Again, disable, right? So this is how we can actually completely remove the attributes, completely change the attributes you want, right? That's how we do manipulations of these elements. Now again, as part of manipulations of the elements, now till now what we have seen, I mean, changing of the state, I mean, properties, attributes, or changing of text, or it can be reading or writing up as things. But we haven't done any removal or insertions yet, right? So let's do now. What I want to do is I want to actually eh, change or add or remove some elements to the existing HTML DOM objects, right? So let's see how we can actually do. Let me create a new HTML page. Let me change it to HTML manipulation 3.html. So let me take the reference here, API reference. I want a script tag. Perfect. So now what we're going to do, let me take a simple div here and let me call it as id as my div1, and in which I have some p tags, let's say para1, and you have something called para2 for instance. So where I'm going to take this id as p1 for instance, and I'm going to take this id as p2. So perfect. I have two steps here, right? Now let's see the first method for inserting elements called append. Let's see that. So let me keep the document ready method. So here what I'm going to do, I am going to use this div, right? Because I want to do stuffs here. My div, make sure you're using hash. Whenever you use id, you should always use hash. Hash is important. If you don't use hash, then it'll think as if you're using a tag, and it'll try to search with the tag with the name my div1. So here what I want to do, for instance, let me take an input button, and I want to actually append on button click for instance, right? So let's say add items for instance, and I'll take id as btn add, something like this. And I'm going to actually keep this in a button click for instance. So let me call it as button dot click event. I am going to write function. In this, I'm going to actually call my div dollar hash my div dot. So now what I want to append. You can see I have a method called append. Let's say here I'll give my HTML. So for instance, here I'm gonna give something like p tag, and I want it to be bolded, right? So the same tag, let me end. So I'll say this is new object for instance. This is what we are appending, right? So when I run this browser, you'll see when I append it. So this is the existing div I have. When I click on this, you'll see, right? It will append at the last of your all the elements. When I go on click right, it will append the same. You'll see, right? Because here every time we click, what we are doing, we are trying to append it to my div1. It will get added to the end of this. That's your append. Similarly, we have, let me take this, comment it, and we'll say prepend. What is prepend? Now append is, it will add the element at the end of all the existing elements, right? But prepend will add at the first position as such. Meaning, let me run this. So when I click on it, now all other elements will be rearranged to the second and third, right? But whatever I'm adding, it will prepend. It will add at the 0th index, for instance, and remaining items will be rearranged. That's your prepend, right? So that's how we do something called append and prepend. Now let's look at the next one. Let me take one more div here, for instance. So let me have HR separated this, right? So let's say I'm calling it as div2, for instance, right? So here what I'm gonna do, let me take some element span. Let's say this is div2, for instance. I'm just giving it, and maybe I have one more span here. Let's say this is div1. Now what I'm gonna show you some interesting stuff here. For instance, I want to change one element. Changing one element in the sense, I want to actually take out this P1 and add it to div2, right? That I can do using something called append to. Now, which one I want to append? I want to append P1 tag. I'm going to take C here dot append to. Now, append to what? I want to append it to the div called my div2. So what it will do, it will actually take out this P1 wherever it is, right? Now P1 is in div1, it will take out and it will automatically add or insert it into div2. When I say append, it will insert at the end. That's how it is. So let me run this and show you. Now you can see here, this is my div1 and div2. I've just created so that you know the change, right? When I click on it, we'll see P1 got removed and P1 got added at the second div at the end. That's our append to. Similarly, we have prepend to. Action is same, but what it will do, it will actually add it to div2 at the first place. When I see para is now here, when I click on it, you will see para will come to div2 and it will get added at a first position of div2. That's your append to and prepend to. Similarly, you have two more functions called after and before. Meaning, so for instance, I have this P1, right? And I want to add new element after this. Yes, I can do that. For instance, I'll just say new. Meaning, after this P1, I want to insert this element. That's what after. So when I run this, you'll see, when I click on it, you'll see after this para1, it will add. Similarly, you have before, right? Before is nothing but it will actually add up before the para1, which is, let's say, click on it, you'll see it will add the data before this. Anyways, if you make it p tag, right, definitely it will actually take up in the same p tag mode. I just gave text, that's why it will just add the text as such. So when I click on add items, now you'll see it will actually add as a HTML element before. That's how it is. That's your adding before and after. So now we have one more, which is a very important stuff called replace. Or first let's check with replace with. Meaning, now what I'm saying here, P1 tag, which means this tag, I want to replace completely, which means this will get removed and this will get replaced. That's how it is. Let's say I'm going to take it in a tags here. Meaning, I'm going to replace the P1 tag, which means this one with the, that's what it is. So let's see, when I run this program, you'll see a P1 is available, now para1 is available. When I click on add, you'll see the P1, which is a para1, will completely get removed and the new element called new will get added. right? This is your replace with. We have one more replace thing which is a bit interesting called replace all, right? But here it works in a different way. Let me show you how. So here I say P1 replace all, which means I want to replace all elements. For instance, P, if I give P here, which means I want to replace all P tags, every P tag, doesn't matter where it is. Let's say, for example, even you have here, for instance, para 3, P3 as para 3 in separate div, for instance, right? I want to replace all P tags with P1, meaning everything will get replaced with this para 1. Let me show you. So here you have para 1, para 2 and all. Click, you'll see everything got replaced with para 1 only. That's your replacing all with your para. That's how we do replace of existing elements you have, right? So similarly, if you want to remove something, right, or delete or something called removing, we have two very important methods to delete or remove. What is that? Now we have two methods called empty and remove. Empty will just remove the content, but it will not touch the selection. But remove completely removes it. Let's see how. So for instance, let me take this div, my div1. Let's play around with this one. Sorry, you have to be in double quotes dot. For instance, let's get the length of it. Length meaning how many elements do we have at this. So when I run this, you'll see, for instance, okay, I have kept in button click. That's fine. Let click on it. You'll see one. One meaning that my div tags are one here. There is one element here, right? Now in this div, what I want to do first, I want to empty meaning I want to remove all these things actually. So here in the same alert, what I'll do, I'll actually create one more alert to print the HTML, for instance. And I say dot HTML. Let's see what happens here. So when I run this one, and this is HTML which is there in div1, right? So now let's say my div1 dot empty, and after this let me just print these two again. Now let me run this. So initially, what is the length? It's 1. What is HTML? It's this. Now after removing, see, length is still 1 because my div is still existing, but you can see there is no inner HTML here because we just did empty. Empty meaning it will just clear off the details inside, but it will still keep the element. That's what empty. But if you see here, even here it is not there, right? It gone. But if you want to remove including the element you are selecting, then yes. Let's run this. Now you'll see we have this div1, para1 and everything you have. When I click on this, see what happens. Initially it says 1. Yes, I have my div1 one instance. Perfect. Now these are HTML span, but it got removed. See, now it's 0. 0 meaning the complete div got removed. There is no more div here. The complete div got removed, and when I click on OK, now you will see undefined, meaning the div1 is no more, right? When div1 is no more, then what there is no meaning in actually getting the nothing's HTML. That's why this will give you undefined. That meaning, yep, there is no element as such. That's how it is. That's how we can do. Now similarly here, when you are removing, right, you can remove with some filters. Yes, you can always do that. So here I can provide what to remove, for instance. So for instance, if I want to remove only P1, yes, I can do that. Or you want to remove only, now these selector guys. Whenever I say selector, you can apply all the selector options which we have learned till now. I want to remove only this. Let's say, then what happens now? So initially, yep, when I click on this, this is 1 and this is my span P1, P2. Click on. Now after removing again, 1 is there. Why? Because I'm just removing one of the element of this div, right? Which means this div still exists. That's why you'll get count 1. And you can see now this is the latest one. It is giving the older one. When I click on it, then it will remove the only P1 as such, hash P1, which is in my div. right? That's how it will get removed from my div one, and it will still give me the same length because I'm just touching upon this. That's how it gets removed based on the filter condition you're actually using, right? Just one element, but your selection or the element section you have selected still be persisting. That's how we normally work with insertions, or basically the manipulation of actual DOMs, right? Now similarly, we have the next step called CSS manipulation, right? Like kind of changing the styles. Yes, we can do. JQuery is very powerful in handling each and every attribute of elements, right? Now here we're gonna talk around with CSS. So some of the CSS elements we have already seen, right? For selected elements, changing the CSS in our previous classes. But let's see something advanced here. Let me create a new page and let me call it as CSS manipulations 1.html. Let me take a script, and in this let me call the script here. Perfect. Let me take a simple p tag. This is CSS CSS manipulation example, for instance. And let me create a simple style. Let me create two styles maybe. Let's say let me call it as my red is one, where I'm gonna call this color as red, for instance. Similarly, I'll say my blue. Let me take a color as blue. This is a simple um, CSS I created, my red and my blue. So initially, for instance, this class for this is my red, for instance, right? Okay. Now what I want to do, based on some action, I want to change, right? I want to change this, um, right? Change this CSS of p tag. So first, let's see this. Now you can see that this is what is red. Initially it is red because we are using my red kind of, right? So now let's understand. For instance, what I want to do, I want to do this as a changing of this color of this p tag in regular intervals, for example, right? So let's see how. Document dot ready. I have a function. Now in this function, what I'm gonna do, when I say setting up in some intervals, right, it has to change, which means we have a inbuilt in JavaScript method called set interval, right? We all know this. In this set interval, we can provide a class. Sorry, we can provide a function. Now let me create a simple function here first, right? So see, even if I'm using JavaScript, I can still write. Even if I'm using jQuery, I can still write JavaScript functions. So let me call it as change CSS here. This is my method. So this method, right? Whatever I'm calling here should get changed maybe every second, for instance. That's a set interval. Now in this change CSS, I'm going to handle actually how to change. Now first let's see. Now first let me check if my ID, let me take ID as P1 for instance. So if this hash P1, let's say if this P1, we have a method called has class. Perfect. Which means does the class, right? What is a default class? For instance, let me take my red, right? So in order to actually, this is selector again, right? If you want to get selector class, then you have to go with dot and so and so. Perfect. So now if P1 this tag has got this, then I have to remove it and add it, right? So how to remove the class? This is how we remove. Dot remove class we have. So what class I want to remove? I want to remove, sorry, my red CSS. And after removing, I want to add, this is a chain again. If you remember, this is a chain we're doing. what it will do, it will do the actions in sequential. First it will execute this one. Okay, fine, it is removed. Then it will start executing this. Add class. Now which class I want to add? Let's say my blue. Perfect. Else, which means if selected p1 doesn't have my red, then it will have my blue, right? So what I want to do? Reverse the action. Simple. So I'll actually remove my blue and add red. Simple. So this is how we handle it. Removing class, adding a class, very important stuff. Now let me run this. You will see what happens here. So this method function CSS change should get added. No, it is not running. Let me refresh. So this CSS, it is not triggering. Why it is not triggering? So document.ready. Let me just look into a code here. So we have changed CSS. So you're calling the method. Perfect. In change CSS, you're saying $p1. Yes. You're checking whether this class is there. Yes, if it is there. That's fine. Let's debug it. Let's debug and see. Not a problem. So every second, this method should get triggered, right? I mean, this method should get. Let me put a debug point here. So here, yes, I mean debugging is coming here. Perfect. And I'm checking has p1 has married. Okay, it goes. Maybe it is red. Yes, it will go here. No. Initially, it is my red. Okay, one second. Notice. Yeah, we have made it color blue also, right? It's my blue. Removing my blue and adding a class. Okay, fine. So why it is not turning to? Okay, it initially turned to red, and now this time, yes, it is going to remove class of my red. Perfect. And add class of dot my blue. Yes, then it should turn to blue, right? Yeah, the method is triggering in a perfect way. My red and my blue. Is this correct? So you have my blue here, which is a class. That's my blue, and you have my blue here, and class. You have my red, and I'm taking hash p1, hash p1, hash p1. Perfect. So there is no issue in it. So let's run it and see. So this should get changed. You can see that method is still triggering, right? You can see my red C, which means my blue is getting triggered, and when I execute again, yes, please. Do you guys see any change here? Yep.
Yeah, here the class is my red or
Oh,
dot my red.
one sec. Oh, got it. 1 second. My mistake. Second. When I'm setting a class, I should not give dot. My mistake, guys.
Yeah.
Yep.
Here.
Thanks. Yeah. Is this what you're saying?
Not there. The down.
Here you're
Here in
saying?
the paragraph.
No. Here it
Yeah.
can be.
Here
No.
you gave
No.
dot my red, but
No, this
that one
can
is
be
not.
this can be correct. No, this is correct because no. Here I just copied this one, right? I copied even dot. No, see when you are removing or adding class, you should just give this. But when you are using it as a selector, right? When you are using it as a selector, then you should actually use. I mean, even for selector, you don't need man. Has class is fine. When I say has class of my red,
Okay.
that's it. Yeah, true. And then remove class and just so let's look at it and then we'll see how it is working. Yeah, perfect. Okay, now you can see it will work in a rotation method. My mistake, guys. So only at selector we can just use dot. We have to use dot, but whenever you're setting up as a data element, right, attribute element, you don't need it, right? I'm actually setting this as a value of one of the attributes, which is class, right? That's how it is. But this, as you're saying, I can set this initially actually, right? Because anyways, when I remove and add, it will automatically get replaced. That's how This will work actually. So selecting and that's it. Perfect. Now this is how I can do. So yeah, and also we have one method called toggling. Right? We are doing this stuff, right? So I can directly say toggle class here. Toggle class meaning, right? It will work with one class, right? For instance, I'm going to take my blue for instance, and let me just comment these things, right? So what it will do, it will set this class if it is not there, otherwise revert it. That's what it does. It is toggling. So when I run this, you will see, right? It happens. Now, if I initially I have set it red, right? That's why it is reverting. But let's say, for instance, initially there is no class, for instance, then it will revert to the same stuff, black. You'll see, toggling is what it does. It'll retain the old one, right? And it will change this. If this is set, then it will again retain the new one, kind of. That's how toggling works. Toggle class works, right? It will keep the change, whatever it is. If you want to change back to the old one, that's how we normally play around with something called your CSS manipulation. So removing mainly, adding, and anyways, we have seen this part. For instance, if you want to set some CSS for this ID, yes, you can always do. Let me just keep this class for instance. Now here we have seen setting up this CSS dot CSS, right? Not dot CSS. For sorry, we have seen this. For instance, I want to set this as I'm not playing with class. Let's say this doesn't have any class as such. It's a plain simple para tag. Yep, I can say something called color, not color. For example, let's say font hyphen size. For instance, I can change it to some, let's say 30 px for instance. So, right. So this CSS will get acted directly. So if you want to keep it in a button click, yeah, it's up to you. So right click and say view in browser. It will automatically say. But what if you want to apply multiple CSS? Can I write CSS and CSS again? You don't need to. We can actually provide object here. How? So in CSS, provide flower bracket open and flower bracket close. Within this, you can provide all. Either you can provide using a text, let's say font size, and let's say I'm going to take color as blue. Now this is something which is called as a JSON text. Or else you can remove this as a normal CSS if you want. So let me just run and see how it works. So now you can see multiple CSS, font size, color got applied, right? That's how you can actually apply. Or you can remove this thing, I mean, meaning that you're actually taking it as a plain text you want. Let's say color, I'll say, yep, I'll say blue here, font size, color. Oh, I'm using font size, yeah. I mean, then you have to use this. For instance, I'll use this color, for instance, right? And maybe I'll say I'll take some other, that's fine. Let me just give one, which means I'm giving a normal plain text, right? Undefined, yeah, sorry, my mistake. You have to give it in blue here, and when you run this, you will have it blue, right? If you want to give in this way, you can give, otherwise you can give in a JSON text mode where you can actually go with multiple attributes. This is recommended as such, right? Where you can actually go ahead with this. So this is how we do HTML manipulations, right? So when I say HTML manipulations, it can be the changing of text, data, adding up values, and so many other stuffs we have, right? How we normally do handle the data as such. So this is what we have for HTML manipulations, right? So this is what we have for manipulations. Then we have two very important topics in jQuery. One, the effects or kind of animations we're gonna see, and then you have events. Events, anyways, we have seen many, but we're gonna touch base on main events, how how we actually play around events, and there are some very important internal jQuery methods which we normally should use for handling events, right? And then we are going to start with Ajax, right? So these two we have, and then we're going to touch with Ajax, and we're going to see Ajax as part of jQuery, and we'll see a part of JavaScript functions how we can actually append, right? So this is what we have. So once we meet, let's right start off with effects, events, and then we'll start off the Ajax part during our morning class. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining. Thank you.